Hi everyone, Eric at Retro Handheld Guides, and today I'll be looking at custom firmware on the RG35XX H. In today's video, I'll be showing you how to install custom firmware, as well as show you the current state of two of the most exciting custom firmware options available for the RG35XX line of devices. Those are Knulli and muOS. So, let's take a look at custom firmware on the RG35XX H. Installing new custom firmware for your device is quite an easy process. By following the steps in this guide, you'll be up and running in no time. So the first thing you'll need in order to install new custom firmware is the firmware itself. Here you can see that I have three examples of custom firmware for my RG35XX H, and those are Knulli, muOS, and StockMod. muOS and StockMod both currently have public releases and are freely available, and I provided a link to those in the description below. Knulli is currently only available in alpha release to supporters, so you will need to support this particular project in order to gain access to that link. Once you gain access to your stock firmware, what you'll do is you'll download the image itself. Now, most of these images are going to be in some form of a compressed archive. Knulli, as an example, is in a GZ archive. muOS is in a zip archive, and StockMod is also in a 7-zip archive. So regardless of which firmware you get, you will want to have your download grab the file that you need, and from there you can then extract that file, the image file from these. I'm using a program called 7-zip, which allows you to extract from any of these archive types that I've mentioned. So if we can see here, if you go into 7-zip, you simply want to extract the files here. Now, each of these archives will contain a file that we're looking for called a .img image. This is your image file that we're going to use to go through a process called flashing to a new SD card. So what you want to do is you actually want to grab a brand new SD card, because we want to keep the original SD card that came with our device still separate. So here you can see that I have a new SD card plugged into my device here, and this one is actually a 16 gigabyte SD card. You'll need something at least 16 gigabytes. You don't need something very big. If you do plan on using multiple 2 SD cards on your device, the first SD card can be small, 8 gigs, 16 gigs, whatever, and then the second SD card can be larger, and that's where you'll be keeping your ROMs, etc. The next thing we need once we have our image file is a flashing software. In this example, I'm going to use a flashing software called Rufus. I like Rufus because it is very small and lightweight. It is contained within a single exe if you grab the portable version. So here you can see that we have Rufus up and running here. I will provide a link to this one in my guide as well. Now, when you're going to flash the new software, all you want to do is you want to ensure that the device selected is your SD card that you've plugged into your computer. And then from there, you will want to ensure that the boot selection is to disk or ISO. And then beside this, you simply click the select button. On the select button, you will go and find the files that you're looking for. So in here, I have my CFW folder, and in this example, we'll be using the Knulli image. Once selected, everything else will automatically show you the information that it needs, and then you simply click the start button. You will get a warning, obviously, that this is going to destroy all of the files that are on the device, so you do want to be careful. This also will destroy any multiple volumes that you might already have, so anything that's on the device will be gone. That's why you want to use a brand new card, or be sure that you don't need anything from your existing card that you're going to be overwriting. And then at that point, it will delete all the partitions and begin the flashing process. Now this will take a couple minutes, so once the flashing process is done, we will have a new bootable image that is available to be plugged into our software. So I'm going to let this process finish, and when we come back, we will see what the next steps are once we have a flashed image of a custom firmware onto our new SD card. You can see here that the process is completed. We are now done with this particular SD card flashing process. So all I need to do is click the close button, If we go back over to our SD card, we can see that it now has some files on it, and you can see here that it is actually not the full 16 gigs that the original card was, and that's because it's created a number of different partitions here. So this is only going to be the initial format of the SD card when it's completed. The next steps are to extract this safely from our device and then plug it into our RG35XX H, at which point it will begin the initial boot process and start uncompressing the files and going through its initial setup process to create all of the directories and files that it needs to. So I'm going to extract this file here, or extract the SD card here, and then plug it into my device, and we'll see what that looks like on our first boot up. So now that I have my image flashed to my SD card, the next step is to just extract it from your computer and plug it into your device. So here on my RG35XX H, this SD card is going to go into the slot labeled TF1. So once I put that into the device, we simply need to then turn it on, and from there it will go through the initial boot sequence. Now, as the initial boot sequence goes, there are a number of things that are going to happen. It's going to expand some of the partitions. It's going to install and move some files. So this process will take a while as it goes through that initial setup, but you do have a little status bar here telling you how far it's gotten as it goes through that entire initial boot sequence. So just let this process start itself up, and then from there we will then go into Knulli, and it should drop us right into our main menu. So here we are in our main menu for Knulli. Now what we want to do is we want to then move a couple of additional files over to this particular firmware, including our BIOS files and our ROMs, in order for us to then get this device running and playing the games that we need. So Knulli does not contain any partitions that are readable by Windows except for the boot partition. So in order to actually access the file structure that you want in order to move over your BIOS files and your ROMs, is I use a process where we use the network settings to then create a network share for this particular device. So to do that, we'll click on the Start key, and then we'll go down into our network settings. Now under here you can see it has automatically a host name called Knulli, and what we want to do is we want to turn on our Wi-Fi so that we can then connect to our network, and then at that point it will go in and it will allow us to share to the computer using a share called Knulli. So I'm going to go through that process now. As we go in, we'll just identify our network ID and our key, and then at that point we will connect to the network. Now that my RG35XX H is connected to the network via the Knulli network settings, the next thing we want to do on our PC is go into our Windows Explorer and type //Knulli. This is the name that we saw under our network settings as the host name. So when we connect to that host name, we can then go into our share, and this is now wirelessly connecting through the network to the internal structure of our device. So on this device, what we want to do is we have two folders that we need to be sure that are populated. The first folder here is the BIOS folder. So this BIOS folder contains all of the various hardware files, or BIOS files that we'll need in order to connect to to use the emulators that we want. This BIOS file folder is something that you will have to source for yourself, but if you kept your existing SD card around, then what you want to do is plug in your original SD card from your device and then copy over the files from that. So I plugged in my original SD card from my device back into my computer, and from here you can see that there is a BIOS folder from the original SD card that came with my RG35XX H. So simply copy this, and we will want to now paste it over here into this file, overwriting anything that is currently in BIOS. So there are quite a lot of BIOS files here. Let that process go and allow it to create all of the files that we need for our BIOS. The second thing that we want to do is also grab our ROMs. So if you do have ROMs that you wanted to take from the original SD card, you can go ahead and move over your ROMs folder at this point as well. Just keeping in mind that you may be using a smaller SD card than your original. Otherwise, you can also move your ROMs manually into this ROMs folder. You'll notice that inside of the ROMs folder there are quite a number of subfolders. These subfolders will be corresponding to each of the various things that you can emulate on this device. So you do have things like your Game Boy Advance, and Game Boy Color. Most of these are going to be fairly intuitive in terms of their naming convention. So if you're looking for N64, NDS is your Nintendo DS, simply grab your ROMs and move them into the subsequent folder here. And once these are all moved over, you will then be able to go back to your RG35XX H. Just make sure that you refresh ROMs. That's easy to do from the menu. Just click the start and then refresh the ROMs, or reset the device, and at that point, once it comes back up, you will be up and running with your Knulli custom firmware on the RG35XX H device. Now that we've moved over our BIOS files and our ROMs files, we're all ready to use Knulli on our brand new device. So now that Knulli is up and running, the first thing that I wanted to mention to you is I noticed that you do need to remap some of these controls. The R2 and the L2 button are not mapped by default properly. To do that mapping, simply click on the Start button and then go into your controller settings, and from there you'll want to go through the controller mapping again. So that'll just go through and ask you to map all of the various buttons back to the buttons that you need. Once that process is complete, you don't need to do it again. So let's just take a quick look at Knulli then. So Knulli is custom firmware based off of the Batocera, which has an emulation station front end, as well as a number of back-end cores from RetroArch and the standalone cores. If you're familiar with custom firmware like ArcOS or Jealous or Rocknix, this is going to be very familiar to you, as the emulation station front end is quite popular on these Linux handhelds. This one, to navigate, you simply use the navigation, your D-pad, to move across your various different systems here. Going into any system, simply select it, and you'll have your game that can simply be launched by clicking on the A button. Here, the nice thing about the Knulli firmware is that we do have access to quite a number of different systems, so you'll be able to access all of the basic retro consoles, as well as some of the newer ones, N64, Dreamcast, PSP, etc. So this is a really nice firmware so far. It is a great choice for your RG35XX H. There is also included in the Knulli firmware the port section, which has Portmaster. So it does come with the Portmaster install script. Just make sure you're connected to the network here, and then click on the install Portmaster. It'll go through its process, and from there you'll have access to Portmaster. Now, at this point in time, Portmaster is not completely supported. There are a number of ports that aren't going to be working on this device. Keep in mind that it is still alpha, but you have access to a lot of great ports. So TMNT, Shredder's Revenge, Stardew Valley were all working last time I tested. So those are great options for this device as well. Otherwise, I really like Knulli. It is a great firmware. It's a really slick interface. You have access to lots of the different things that you need to get into the systems that you want. And as you start up the various games, you do have access to all of the options that you need for RetroArch. Simply clicking on the function key at the top and then pressing the B button at the same time will access your RetroArch backend, where you can go ahead and modify your core options and other RetroArch type settings in there. So that is the Knulli firmware, and it is a great option for your RG35XX H. The next custom firmware we're going to take a look at is muOS. muOS is available for the RG35XX line of devices, and the installation process is exactly the same as we went through for Knulli. So simply find the image that you need, flash it to your device, and then once that is done, extract the SD card from your PC and plug it into your device and let it go through the initial boot sequence. So I've already done that here. I've gone through the initial boot sequence, and I now have an SD card that I can use. The nice thing about muOS is that it does create partitions in a format that can be read by a Windows PC. So here on our muOS card, we do have a couple of things that we need to put back onto this card that are not already available in the initial image, and that is going to be our BIOS files. Again, you can grab these BIOS files from your original SD card. They go into your muOS BIOS folder. And then your ROMs files. Now the nice thing about the ROMs files here is that you can create any kind of structure that you want. Now I've simply replicated a structure that I already have, similar to the Knulli structure. The nice thing about muOS is you can actually call these folders anything that you want, and muOS is going to pick it up and allow you to select the cores that you want to use for each of these, but it also picks them up automatically if you have a naming convention similar to things that have already been seen. So for the Knulli structure as an example, it will pick up these cores as well and drop those drop those ROM files onto your SD card into the existing file structures that are here under your ROMs folder. So that is the installation process for muOS, another simple one. Let's take a look at what muOS looks like on our device. Here we have muOS running on my RG35XX H. One of the advantages of using muOS is that this one actually has a very quick boot time. So this one is currently my daily driver on my RG35XX H as well as my 28XX, just because of its fast boot time. I love the ability to just quickly turn on the device, have it boot right into what I want to play, and start playing pretty quickly. So if we take a look at muOS as an example, here is the new menu that we have for muOS. You have your Explore content, you have shutdown, reboot, etc. Another thing that I love about muOS, similar to the Knulli, is that we have a number of themes. There are some really great themes for this device now. If you check out their Discord, there is an entire channel just dedicated to the various themes that we have. So it comes pre-installed with a number of themes. I do really like a couple of themes here, including the MinUI theme. So I'm currently running this. If you are familiar with MinUI, it is a very simplistic, simple to navigate menu structure. And I kind of like that simplicity, just making it as easy as possible to find the content that you're looking for. So this is my current theme that I'm using on my RG35XX H just because of its simplicity. And again, now that we have access to this device, we also have access to utilities, including Portmaster on this one as well. Portmaster is currently better supported on muOS, so we do have access to all of the ports that are available, and most of them are running quite well. And again, that includes your TMNT as well as the Stardew Valley. So that's another advantage of using muOS, is that we do have full Portmaster support. Accessing content is easy. Simply access the content that is on your SD card. Here you can see that we have all of the folders that I created on my SD card. And again, as long as it's in a format that is a naming convention that it's seen before, it can easily recognize what you want for the different systems and then quickly move in to execute those games by default. There are a number of cores available for each of these different systems as well, so you can easily figure out what core you want to execute the files inside of that folder as well. If you click on the select button, it does bring up the assign, so you can go ahead and find the system that you want to assign it to this, and then from there it will allow you to pick the core that you want to associate with this particular folder. So you can see here, GBA has a number of different cores available. So that's one of the advantages of using muOS, is just simply the quick startup, the ability to get right into the games that you want without too much of boot time, as well as the ability to access the ROMs partition without having to go through that network share. It's easily accessible as soon as you plug in your SD card into your device. Again, I love muOS. This is currently my daily driver, and I think I'm going to be using this one for the time being. As Knulli becomes more developed and as they start working out the kinks and it leads to the alpha stage, I may switch over to that one as well. The nice thing about using these different custom firmwares is that it's easy to swap between the two. It's completely contained on the SD card, so simply grab a new SD card and you can flip between the two custom firmwares by popping that out and then popping a new SD card in, and then you're up and running on the same device with a different custom firmware. So there are a number of different custom firmwares aside from these ones. You do have your stock mod, which uses the existing custom firmware or the existing firmware that comes with the device with a couple of modifications to improve some of its quality of life features. There's MinUI that has, again, a quick boot, as well as the ability to jump right in and out of your different games. So if you're looking for additional options for the RG35XX line, feel free to check out my guide in the description below as well. So I hope you liked this particular guide in terms of being able to create custom firmware for your device. If you have any other guides that you'd like to see or any comments on this particular guide, feel free to leave those in the description below.